Hi, everyone. This is Glenn Gray with Itential, and want to just welcome everybody to today's webinar, seventh part in the series, Modern Network Compliance. As a quick intro, as I said, my name is Glenn. I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Itential, and I am joined by our resident networking guru, Rich Martin.
Hey, Glenn. Hey, everyone. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and I'm sure everyone else is too. We're excited to jump into today's discussion to cap off this 7-part series of network compliance and showcase some of our incredible customer stories and how Itential users achieve network compliance through network automation. But before we get started, a couple of housekeeping points. Everyone on the call will be muted. If you have any questions along the way, please drop them in the question panel, which you can find under the webinar. We'll do our best to answer questions along the way and cover any remaining ones at the end during our Q&A session. However, if we don't get to all of your questions, we will answer them via email shortly after the webinar. So let's get started. Well, that's us.
Hey, Glenn.
Hi, Rich. Okay. Quick agenda. So we're going to just recap a little bit here for those of you who haven't been able to join us in the other 6 sessions. We'll talk a little bit about the components of modern network compliance. We'll talk about how Itential's solution is different. And then we're going to jump in and we're going to talk about 3 of our customers. The first one's a large airline who was struggling with data center compliance. We're going to talk about a large pharmaceutical organization that was interested in implementing compliance across a hybrid cloud situation and including some on-prem legacy devices as well. And then lastly, we're going to talk about a financial services company that was also trying to enforce hybrid cloud compliance, but they were also struggling with velocity issues and we're interested in using our validation and auto remediation techniques to speed up delivery of services. And then we'll finish off with a Q&A. All right, so here we go. Now, I'm just going to throw this out there. Again, one more time, this super controversial statement. It's only controversial to people that don't work at Itential, apparently. But you will never have a compliant network without automation. Now, what do we mean by that? Rich, would you like to answer that for me?
Well, I think we've taken everybody down a pretty lengthy journey to show that, right, for these last 6 webinars. But the concept is pretty simple. In today's modern network, things move at such a rapid clip of changes. We're seeing the network expand into different domains and regions, like the cloud and cloud native networking and cloud services. In order for networking teams who are already struggling with like traditional on-prem networks with tremendous amount of backlog with things going on there, in order to manage, especially with configuration and compliance, all of this new network technology that's coming their way, in some cases being thrown over the fence and saying, hey, this has gotten to a place, this cloud networking has gotten to a place where it's so complex, we actually need your help now, right? They have to be able to automate as well as drive compliance across all of that network. And so and we'll talk about this in these use cases as well. These two concepts of compliance and automation need to be more tightly coupled than they've ever been, right? As our CEO says, these have been ships in the night, and really they need to be tethered together for network teams today. Again, rate of changes it has increased across the entire network. The network domains have increased. A lot of this still falls on the shoulders of the networking team. So how do we do compliance across all of this? Well, we need automation without creating additional backlog.
Agreed. And I'm really glad that you mentioned this philosophy that our CTO has. I feel like I skipped a slide here. I did not. Okay. And how it relates to compliance specifically, and automation, and how there are 2 ships passing in the night, generally speaking. And our philosophy is they should be part of a single solution. Before we jump into that, let's talk really quickly about what we consider to be the 3 key components of modern network compliance. Now, of course, this is something that for those of you that have joined us in any of the 6 previous webinars in this series, have heard before, but it's worth repeating here. The first component here is the ability to create and enforce a golden configuration across CLI devices, network elements, controller application APIs, and so on. So Rich, talk to us really quickly about a golden configuration and again, why this is such an important element and a key component to network compliance.
Yeah, so compliance is, we've kind of broken that down in the previous webinars, but let's say we have a standard, right? At the end of the day, your configuration needs of any network element, whether it's CLI or API driven, needs to have some sort of standard for its configuration. And that standard typically encompasses things like security, performance, reliability, resiliency, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that we have a network that's operating according to that standard and ideally efficient for, where your standard is today. It needs to adhere those things. And those can be driven by best practices, by regulations, policies, things like that. So a golden configuration is just simply that standard for all of your network devices and services. And so you've got to be able to create that across the entire network. So when we talked just a moment ago, the new domain of networking is cloud and all this new cloud network infrastructure, VPCs, transit gateways, all the things and all the different, cloud platforms that have their very unique network offerings and services. Compliance needs to be driven across all of that. And so the first thing is, how do we create in a simple way, because legacy tools have been very difficult, quite honestly, to build golden configuration templates. And those things were limited to CLI. Now we're talking about a world of API solutions. So you mentioned controllers, things like SD-WAN, wireless, but you'll see more and more controller-based solutions for the network. And API is also driving many of all the things in the cloud world, right? So compliance needs to be driven across everything. How do we create, and then how do we enforce across everything?
And that's what we do with the golden configuration. Number two, the ability to auto remediate, right? To automate the remediation of compliance issues found. So just really briefly, Rich, what do we mean by automation of remediation?
It's one thing to solve the problem of creating and checking your network infrastructure for compliance, right? What we would expect to find, especially if you're just starting down the road to compliance, is your network completely compliant? No, you're going to find lots of things way out of compliance, right? And some of that is part of the story of some of our customer journey and how they got to that state of, wow, everything is completely out of whack here, right? Probably worse than we imagined. And so it's one thing to identify those, differences, those things that need to be changed, but then you've created a backlog that needs to be addressed. Right. So if you're going to do this as a network team, if you've got this mountain of work that's already being done, just keeping the network going, right, your day-to-day operations, you can actually create an even bigger backlog of work when you identify the devices and services that are out of compliance, because now you have to remediate those. And so manual remediation can lead you to a pretty tremendous backlog. In today's environment, like we talked about, in today's network, everything's happening so rapidly, expansions rapidly, changes are happening rapidly. You must have automation to address that. And that's why we see these things as so closely aligned together.
Indeed. Number three is the ability to validate changes to devices and network services before they are actually made, sort of preventing the need for automated remediation and so on. So talk to us a little bit about validation, Rich.
Right. So traditional, automation or compliance techniques want to compare the standard to what's already applied to a part of the network, a network router, a switch, some sort of network device, right? And so this is always kind of a reactive measure, right? And this is the way it's always been. But again, in today's network, this doesn't work anymore. Think about all the things that are being deployed in the cloud, all that infrastructure. Can enterprises have, how much delay is acceptable when a bad configuration is made to a security group in the cloud that allows access to network or applications and servers, right? We've got to reduce that as much as possible. Automation can help, but here's an idea. Why don't we validate any proposed change to any part of the network infrastructure before it's actually applied? And so the same compliance techniques and the same compliance engine in Itential that can check for, in a reactive way, can check for compliance on a device, can also be utilized to validate a proposed change before it's made. And so using these two things together can help drive the, compliance to, if we don't, so it's like, why fix a problem when you can avoid it?
Hey,
and that's
absolutely.
the bottom line to it, right? So how can we
Absolutely.
create a process that avoids a problem while at the same time understanding that the reality of the world is that there are ways to manually change a device or a service, to change that configuration. So you still need the kind of the traditional process, and how do we drive that detection and remediation down as small as possible, but then start leveraging validation processes for things like self-service.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up, because, for those of you who haven't gone back and watched some of the other webinars in this series, one of the things that Rich demonstrated was the ability to cobble these three things together: golden configurations and the enforcement of golden configurations, automated remediation, and validation. He strung those together in a single workflow, which allowed an organization to have self-service networking, where someone from a DevOps team or something like that could actually come in, make a request, have the request validated to ensure that it won't violate any of the rules that are enforced by the golden configuration, and then automatically spin up infrastructure and make network changes without the need for anybody to actually come in and touch a CLI, or actually interface with a VPC or something along those lines.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that many would consider that a very advanced technology, because we were talking about event-driven closed loop auto remediation, right? We're talking about self-service validation through like ServiceNow. But when you actually step it all back and look, it starts with compliance. Compliance is where things started, and we made it very easy to go from building your compliance and configuration manager application to adopting automation right as kind of a natural next step to that, and then building from that. And so there's a pathway to address kind of that skills gap that a lot of network practitioners feel. And we showed that and demonstrated that throughout this series.
Yeah, and I think it speaks again to the philosophy that we touched on earlier, this idea that your compliance solution and your network automation solution really need to be the same thing.
That's right.
And so let's talk about that really quickly here. So, this graphic here, what it's really showing you is componentry inside Itential's automation platform, and what they really do in terms of function and how they sort of build on one another. And so at the very bottom layers here, you're talking about automated network compliance, which is what we've been covering at length in this webinar series. The ability to integrate with devices and services, and communicate with devices and services through a single console, and the ability to create golden configurations and enforce your standards, your network standards, compliance standards across any type of network device or service across a distributed network. Then we talk about the automation studio, right? Like the next layer here is bringing in the automation studio, which allows us to kind of string together a series of network tasks in a single end-to-end automation. And then lastly, when we're talking about modern IT orchestration, we're really talking about some of the things that Rich just touched on earlier, right? The ability to do closed loop automation, the ability to respond to something that's happened on the network automatically, make an automatic remediation to it, the ability to allow self-service networking, where DevOps teams and developer application teams can go in and make changes to the network compliantly and safely without adding backlog to the network engineer's queue. So again, we really taken this philosophy to heart, that compliance and automation are part of the same solution and need to be part of the solution. And as you can see, we've architected our product that way. All right, well, let's talk about our first case study. So this is a large US domestic airline. It's a customer of ours. And they came to us because they had experienced some outages. And these outages were extremely costly. They literally took the airlines offline. Now, we're not talking about airplanes dropping out of skies here. What we're really talking about is the ability to sell tickets, the ability to scan tickets, the ability to manage things at each of your branches, which in this case is really the airport. And this all started with outages that were happening in the data center. And this happened because there were manual changes happening in the data center on network configurations, and they were done out of compliance. They were done out of a change management process. and they were very, very difficult to track and troubleshoot. And as you can see here, the challenge was that the environment was full of bad configurations. It created over 47 hours of production downtime in 1 year, which for an airline, we're talking millions of dollars here. So passengers could not purchase tickets and airplanes could not take off. There were literally planes grounded here. So Rich, talk to me a little bit about this case and what their network situation looked like. What was their environment? What kind of integrations did they require? Those types of things.
Yeah, so I think the first thing to understand is this is probably having a network that's out of compliance is not a unique situation. So some of the context is like, first ask the question, how does a network get so far out of compliance that it can cause those problems? Well, here's how, and this is, like I said, this is fairly typical. Networking folks are deploying a new switch. If there's not a single application that holds the golden configuration, which is the standardized template for that type of switch, wherever it lives in the network, maybe they pull it off of their desktop somewhere. They've saved a configuration that they believe is the golden config.
Or perhaps they pulled it from an outdated CMDB or something like that.
Or they could have pulled it from the last switch that they logged into, right? Which may not have been updated itself in months or years. And so this is how you start to get into a situation where the network becomes, every network device is its kind of own unique snowflake, right? There's no consistency across it. And remember when we spoke earlier in some of the other webinars about what is compliance and what drives it and why you need compliance, one of the main tenets of that was reliability, resiliency. Right. Certain features on routers, especially those in regards to resiliency, when something fails in the network, it needs to back up over this other route or this other link. If those things aren't configured correctly across the board, then your resiliency feature doesn't work.
Right.
And that's a lot of what we're seeing here is, okay, everything is kind of like, there's no standardization. The network works, but a lot of these resiliency features don't work, right? And you don't find that out until when there's some sort of outage. Your network is resilient. It should fail over, but it doesn't because the configurations are wrong.
Right.
So you get into a lot of situations like that, and that's exactly how lots and lots of networks fall out of compliance. And so starts with building that golden configuration, and that's the source from which everything you deploy should start from. So everybody's got at least the latest standard based off of that golden config. So use that consistent source, and then building within our platforms, they started building the automations that can do the network, the compliance check across the entire network. So now you are starting to dig yourself out of that hole where we don't have a compliant network, we don't have time to make these changes, right? One of the things about this is in this type of network environment, like you just said, super critical. So that also means we have very, very small maintenance windows available to us, 3-4 hours at the most, every single day to make as many changes to fix things. And if we're always trying to fix things that are the most prioritized that are broken, do we ever get a chance to go back and remediate things that have not broken yet?
Right.
Like this is that vicious cycle that network teams all over the place find themselves in. And so what Itential was able to do is give them a consistent place to easily and quickly build a golden configuration template, right? Give them the tools within there to start to apply and enforce that golden configuration template across all of those devices and start to standardize across the board. And then being able to do automated remediations. One of the things about that is if we can remediate it in part of an automation and it meets a requirement of like, this is something that absolutely needs to be done quickly, then we should be able to build an automation that identifies that type of configuration change, understands that this is something that needs to be applied quickly, immediately, and batches those up. And now we can get more done in that small maintenance window.
Right. And in this case, we were talking about, again, this is data center here specifically. We through conversations that we've had with the organization, we know that they plan to roll this out in other areas as well. But right now we're talking about 5,000 Cisco iOS network devices. So some traditional network devices here. it looks like they had some existing Ansible scripts and things like that for some basic automation tasks. And then of course ServiceNow and Bitbucket and other integrations as well. So in this case, Rich, we're talking about really this organization just took Itential's automation platform and really kind of focused in that configuration management area first.
Mhm.
They built out these golden configurations, and then through automations, enforce these golden configurations across their entire data center, and put things like automated remediation in place to ensure that any kinds of changes that were made to the network that were out of compliance were immediately brought back into compliance.
That's right. That's right. And you know, if you think back at our webinar series, we started by showing how easy it is in the product to build a golden configuration, and how just from the configuration manager application itself, without even getting into the automation, building your own automations, how you can do quite a bit right there, right? And there's a lot of remediation, you know, automated remediation going on by being able to select certain changes, scrutinize. Okay, this configuration is out of compliance. Here's the specific configuration lines. Scrutinize those and say, I want to make those changes automatically right now, right? So you can start with that manual process within our platform without building a workflow, and that gives you the context that when you're ready to go into Automation Studio, which we also showed how quickly you can do that using all the same features, just dragging and dropping tasks in, building your automation that way. And so that's the natural progression, right? And then from there, you start building more and more automations, and including, you know, to address the very specific, you know, needs of your network.
Right.
And that's a powerful thing.
Indeed.
That's a very powerful thing.
In this case, this organization was able to eliminate all their configuration-based outages. And this is a great one here because we were able to really put dollars and cents to this.
That's right.
This mitigated over $1 million of loss per hour of downtime. Just imagine they $47 million of loss in 1 year just based on downtime due to misconfigurations in their network. Really astounding. They automated the standardization of golden configurations that we've talked about, compliance and remediation, and they've also automated software upgrades. In addition to that, we're also kind of talking about dollars and cents here. They've added the capacity of 2 network full-time engineers with, you know, and did that avoiding new additional hires and all of the headaches that come with, you know, trying to find a new hire in a market that's really hot like this, and then training the new hire on your specific domain and those types of things. And they've got a great quote here. Before Itential, our best engineer took 4 months to write an Ansible script for an upgrade that with Itential they had working by lunch. So, you know, for those of you organizations, or for those of you out there that work in organizations that feel like scripts are a good way to automate, we don't disagree. We believe that they are. This is a faster way to do it, and we can do it by incorporating your existing scripts, bringing them in, turning them into API access to devices, if you will.
That's right.
All right, so let's talk about the next organization. This is a global pharmaceutical company, and they came to us specifically looking to enforce compliance in their cloud deployments, in their AWS deployment. But during the sales cycle, as we were talking to them, you know, they learned more about our hybrid cloud capabilities. We learned more about their environment and realized that they had a lot of legacy devices, including some that were traditional legacy devices from Cisco that did not have API access or controller access. And they decided, hey, let's branch out here. And this is a really interesting story because this one spans multiple teams inside the organization, right? We were talking to the cloud team. We were talking to campus branch network administrators, and the people that were managing SD-WAN as well. And so, you know, again, spanning multiple teams here, and that's a really interesting one because, you know, you have these teams typically in organizations like this that are working in silos, that have their own tools, that have their own processes. And what you have when you've got a situation like that is the opposite of standardized, right? You've got sort of a chaotic enforcement of compliance, if you will. So Rich, just talk to us really quickly, you know, give us a quick overview of their network, and you know, the types of integrations that they were having to do, and then we'll talk some more about results.
Yeah, so this was an interesting one because, you know, one of the things we talk a lot about is the fact that there is a need to do compliance over cloud infrastructure, right? We've showed that over and over. We know that legacy tools just simply, they're CLI focused. They don't do anything in the world of API, which is the modern world we live in today, and cloud being, probably the biggest growth of network infrastructure is in the cloud. And so the customer recognized that we don't have a tool that does this. You just said they had tools in all the different organizations, the different groups, right? They had their own tools. But what are we doing in the cloud that can drive compliance? And remember, as a pharmaceuticals company, heavily regulated, right? Mm-hmm. And so we understand the standards that we have to apply. What is the tool we need to use to apply them as we start to grow in the cloud, right? How do we take that same, we understand what we need to do, but what is the tool that helps us do it? Especially in regards to a networking team that is, working in the cloud, right? We know how to do it in the world of CLI. How do we do it here? So it starts for these guys there, understanding that they need something, right? But what we saw was that as they recognize the capabilities of configuration manager, okay, you can do API things, but in the cloud, but what about Meraki? Meraki uses APIs, right? And so the team leveraging Meraki, doing things in dashboards, ironically, dashboards and controllers make it really easy to make changes fast. But when you make a change, they don't tell you if it meets the compliance, or you just broke compliance standards, right?
Right.
So this is that whole automation and compliance really needing each other again. And so if this uses APIs on the Meraki controller, can we drive compliance by looking at how things like Ethernet switches are configured, right? Or even though it's not CLI? And the answer is yes. That's one of the capabilities of our platform, is understanding that we can derive a configuration through an API, creating the golden configuration standard. And so the same methodology we use to drive that through cloud, we can do it through any API networking type device, and Meraki being one of them. In fact, we've got demos showing that. And being able, so that now another team is able to leverage the same tool, the same golden configuration tooling for their network component, which is different from cloud, right? And then you look at this and say, well, wait a minute, you support way legacy devices, right? You support, many legacy CLI devices and more modern CLI devices in the same methodology and the same tooling. And so build your golden configuration for your iOS, your legacy iOS devices, build your golden configuration for your iOS XE devices, which are a little more modern, but still CLI driven, your cloud API network, services, and your API driven, network solutions that are API driven. All of those being brought into the same application, giving all of them the same leverage of compliance across all that, which is precisely what an organization needs.
Right.
Having compliance in just one subset of your network doesn't get the job done. It needs to be across everything. And so being able to bring all of these network technologies together, regardless of whether they're CLI, legacy CLI, right? Modern CLI, modern controller-based API, or cloud native and cloud, based API managed devices and services, and driving compliance across all that same platform, and then being able to quickly get into the automation side of things as well, right? Because one of the things that we do recognize is that when somebody delivers, if an IT group delivers an application, that touches multiple groups within IT, right? That touches multiple groups within just the networking, right? So in a hybrid cloud situation, we have things in the data center, right? So there's a network in the data center, there's a network in cloud or multiple clouds, and we have applications and systems that touch all of that. Mm-hmm. So being able to now address not only the compliance, but the automation across all of that in a single platform, that's powerful. And that's exactly what IT organizations and enterprises need.
Indeed, and this was a really forward-looking organization in the sense that they were able to bring together multiple teams to utilize the product at one time. Often what we see is an organization will come to us, or at least a single department in an organization that says, I've got a specific need around compliance for either CLI or for API. But generally, we're really engaging with one team, and then often we are able to spread the conversation to multiple teams and do exactly what this organization did. So if you're in the process of evaluating it and you're on an individual team right now, you're in the process of evaluating our product and you're on an individual team, bring in your colleagues, right? Bring in your colleagues from other teams, your peers, and let's talk to them too, because if you can narrow this down, as Rich said, and manage compliance from a single device like this or from a single software platform like this, it really makes things much easier, and it is much easier to enforce standardization and compliance across all of these different network domains. So for this organization, the results are really interesting. They were able to automate OS management and updates. This was a really big one for them because of all of their legacy devices, right? Which they were essentially updating one at a time. And when you've got 15,000 legacy iOS devices out there, you can imagine it's pretty onerous to keep up with the software updates on them. They enforce compliance across CLI and API infrastructures we've talked about through our golden configuration tree. And they increased automation adoption across all teams, right? So maybe there were teams that were just thinking about compliance, and they now have access to a full end-to-end automation and orchestration platform as well. And just a great quote here from this organization: "We have a broad portfolio of devices ranging up to 20 years old." Just think about that. These are really genuinely legacy devices here. Every software upgrade we do is manual, painful, and slow. With Itential, we were able to move fast, accelerate our rate of change, and ensure that we have an automation platform that brings common automation techniques and skills together. So again, breaking down those silos, allowing teams to use one single platform. All right, lastly, a large global retailer. And they had a hybrid cloud compliance situation that was kind of similar to the last one, but they took it even a step further here. So this organization was, again, this is a large global retailer that had brick and mortar presence that they relied on for a lot of their business, and also a really strong e-com presence as well. And they knew that things were shifting and over time, and so they had sort of mapped out over the course of, call it 5 years or so, this ramping up, the scaling up of their e-com organization, and they're scaling down somewhat of the brick and mortars. Well, guess what happened? A macro event that nobody expected, and it was COVID-19. And so what this did is effectively kind of shut down operations at the brick and mortars, and it meant that they had to accelerate their timeline very rapidly for scaling their e-com platform as well. And so what you ended up with here was DevOps teams and teams that support the application developers having to move very quickly, and viewing the network operations and engineering teams as effectively a bottleneck here, because and really they did it for good cause. I mean, good on these guys, because they were concerned about taking the network out of compliance by moving so fast, and they simply just did not have the bandwidth to manage it. And so this is a story about an organization having to move in a different direction very rapidly. And as so often happens, the network team ends up being viewed as that bottleneck, and they came to us and sought out our solution. So talk to us a little bit about their network environment and what these guys did, Rich.
Yeah, I think you framed it up pretty well, but I would start with the context of, this is exactly why compliance and automation need to be so closely aligned in the modern networking world that we live in. It's just modern, IT technology world we live in, but we have to make these changes quickly for a lot of reasons. It could be innovation, it could be an event, whatever it may be. This is a great example of the expectation that if we rapidly hit the gas on automating infrastructure, right? Just hit the gas on it.
Without compliance.
Without compliance, the expectation that the network team had was there's going to be some things that are badly configured.
And
right?
they were right. And, I believe that in a lot of cases, that's exactly what happened.
Well, exactly. That's exactly the case. However, you have to balance that out with
the needs of the business.
The needs of the business, right? So that the other side of that coin is, okay, we need to have compliance, but it can't be manually done. That creates the backlog, right? We need to be able to automate this and tie these two things together so that we don't create additional backlog, especially in an instance where, for the sake of the business and the company, we have to move in this direction very quickly, right? So how do you balance that out? That's kind of the struggle that a lot of organizations have been in and will continue to be in. And so traditional techniques of doing it, they don't work. This is exactly the situation they found themselves in. And so we need to make sure, from a network perspective, we need to make sure that as quickly as new infrastructure is deployed through automation, that there's a compliance process that's working ideally within it, right? Or and externally, like as a reactive agent. So this is the kind of the traditional methodology, along with the validation. The understanding is that, if we can find a solution that allows us to identify badly configured things in our network, right, which we expect, but then remediate them quickly, but at the same time avoid the problem of badly configured things. Validation, is a feature. That is the ideal solution. It accomplishes both things, and it accomplishes them quickly. So again, this is why the Itential platform was the solution for them. It allows them to quickly, using Configuration Manager, build compliance for both the on-prem data center and for the cloud. It allowed them to solve that problem of reducing the amount of time by doing remediation, reducing the amount of time that out of compliance devices are out there, or services are out there. But at the same time, the goal was, we need to avoid these completely.
Yeah.
We need to avoid that completely, and that's validation. So that's why our compliance engine allows you to do that, both sides of it. Both are required, but going forward, let's avoid the problems before we create them, right? That's wisdom right there. So because of that, now they have a consistent configuration across on-prem and cloud infrastructure. Their traditional tools that they already had in place simply could not do that, and could not do it effectively. Or in order to do it, you have to do some unnatural code writing, some unnatural things, within these traditional configuration compliance applications that they just were never meant to do. And it's kind of like a bolt-on thing. In this case, this is engineered with these features, with the idea of future-proofing through being able to naturally and natively adapt to whatever APIs are out there, whatever services are behind it or systems are behind it, and integrate that into compliance and automation. So it's a much better solution. And some of the workflows can now become very, as they move from that configuration and compliance, because the idea is we need to automate all of this together. Now the workflows can become, almost in a sense, I call it like a triage. Right? Because a network engineer understands that there are certain changes. So if I find something that needs to be fixed, remediated, we can automatically remediate these things, right? So some of those things, and this is typically what comes up, is like lots of changes maybe need to be made around load balancing or firewall rules, right? And sometimes if those changes are made manually or even through an automation with incorrect information, you're going to have some things that aren't right. And so can we apply validation to enforce that? Absolutely. And can we build a compliance check that also allows us to do some auto remediation if necessary, if things kind of slip through? And so there's a triage effect. So maybe like load balancing, under certain cases, load balancing issues, like here's a problem with this load balancing configuration. Maybe that's an acceptable thing we can make a change to, right? So there's a triage of that, like low priority or low impact type of configuration. But automation could also say, well, under these circumstances, for this, maybe it's a firewall rule set. We want to have somebody in that team put some eyeballs on it, right? But still allow them to click and make that change. And we can gather that information up from the different systems, controllers, even from the end device itself, present that to them, right? And now this is kind of another bucket for triage. These kind of changes, boom, click that. I have all the data I need as a security or network engineer, and I can say, yep, that's good. And then maybe there's like routing protocols and things like that, that like, whoa, we can't touch that. We need to make sure that's somebody hands-on, right, at a high level. And so you can start to build really, very powerful automations that allow you to triage things out based off of those requirements. But it starts with compliance. It starts with the ability to tie that back to automation and understanding the vision of, we don't want to be a bottleneck. We want to make this as efficient as possible, but as safe as possible as well.
Right. It's really about your level of comfort with automation. And what we tend to see, well, I think what Rich is describing here really is that, there are going to be some tasks where you want to have eyeballs on them, right? You want to have a human being take a look at it and say, our automated compliance check has found something that's wrong here. Do you want to go ahead and fix this? And what we've seen over time is that, especially with a lot of our customers, is that as they become more comfortable with automation solving a lot of the issues, those manual checkpoints tend to get smaller and smaller and kind of go away and less frequent. So we'll talk results really quickly. In this case, they were able to automate firewall division, device provisioning, OS updates, network compliance validation across their entire network. But what was really interesting here, in my view, is that they use these compliance building blocks that Rich has been talking about really throughout the entire series to create a compliant self-serviceable network, right? As we talked about earlier with this specific organization, they had velocity issues. They had the rate of change and the rate of requests coming at the network operations team was really just too much to handle, especially when they were viewing it through the lens of compliance. And they were able to use these building blocks of auto remediation, validation, and golden configurations to help them create a self-servicing network that allowed DevOps teams and application developer support teams go in and make compliant changes to the network using validation and automated remediation. And they've got a great quote here. Prior to Itential, they had massive headaches due to hybrid cloud, and their existing product, SolarWinds, couldn't support their needs. Itential was the only solution that provided the validation and auto remediation capabilities needed to ensure that their teams could work together to make changes quickly and while staying in compliance. All right. Well, that is all we've got for today. And this is, of course, the last in our series of 7 webinars around compliance. We thank you all for joining us. And before we go, we just have a couple of questions that we'll answer. The first one is, this is a good question. I already have some automations that use Ansible and Python. And we've seen that, of course, Rich, in a lot of the organizations that we work with. Is it possible to use these with your platform, or do they have to start over again, essentially, with automation?
Yeah, so one of the things you probably noticed then when you asked that question is that some of the integrations we had were with existing scripts or automation, like Python and Ansible probably being the top 2 automation scripting, resources that are probably existing in most enterprises today, doing very specific tasks. Our philosophy is all automation is good. So what we've done is we understand that like every organization is comprised of different groups, DevOps, networking teams, that may or may not be adopting automation in different ways and different methods. So whatever automation you've already done, whether it's Python, Ansible, we actually have a way to onboard that into our platform and make it as simple as a drag and drop element into our automation studio, so that those automations can be leveraged. And there's a process to go through it. We've done it in previous webinars that we've showed, but there is a very straightforward way of using all those automations. You don't have to throw it out and rebuild it in Itential. Part of our philosophy is we want to use everything you've got, but allow people that maybe aren't writing scripts to leverage it and then use it in our drag and drop, like no code, workflow canvas to start leveraging everything you've got. Because the whole point is driving automation, not in pockets, but across the whole organization.
Right. I think that's a really good segue actually to our next question. And this is a question that comes up quite often when we're speaking with customers. How much coding will I have to learn to use your product?
So when we get that question, this is like the skills gap. Right. This is the skills gap concern, valid concern, because if you look at the progression of network automation, it started with you need to you need to learn to write code.
Right.
Right. And
That's
specifically, right. You need to learn to write Python, and then Ansible, adoption started to make it so that you didn't have to be a hardcore Python programmer, but you're very limited in what you can do. So really, like the concept in most people's minds is I have to learn to actually do both, learn Ansible and Python if I want to actually automate lots and lots of things on the network. We're here to tell you, you don't have to write any code. That's a kind of a legacy way of thinking from several years ago. Spend some time in our platform. Watch our previous webinars where I go from config manager to automation studio in a single step, and I show you how you can quickly leverage with zero code, how you can leverage automation in a very simple way to start building, everything that you want to build. Again, coupling that back to the previous question, we can still use all of those automations, whether they're yours or somebody else on the team. We can bring those into our platform and make those drag and drop tasks as well. But at the end of the day, you don't have to do that. You don't have to write code in order to automate, which is where I think a lot of folks are concerned, because that skills gap is a pretty big gap to cover.
Indeed.
If you're trying to learn Python and Ansible, like just one of those is a lot of time. Right. So you can start building automations, and really the value is not about learning to write code. The value is the process, the technology, the pre-check and post-check conditions that say it's safe to make a change, make the change. We've made the change and everything looks good. That's part of the mental process of every network engineer. Let's make it easy for you to build an automation just following that process. And eventually it becomes more of a natural thing where you don't have to write a bunch of code to do that. And so for those that don't want to or don't have the time to, this is exactly what they're looking for. And for those that are down that journey, we incorporate all that in there as well.
That's great. Well, that's all we've got time for today. Before we leave, we would like to encourage you to go and sign up and try IAP for yourself. We have a free trial out there. It's free for 30 days. You have full access to the product. We have created a simulated network with mock devices on it that will allow you to safely and comfortably learn the platform and learn how to automate using the platform. And when you're ready to connect it to your own network, we've made it really easy to do that as well. So encourage you all to go out there and try the product. It's at itential.com/get-started, and sign up, give it a try, and tell us what you think. All right, Rich. Well, this has been a fun journey. 7 webinars down. And I'm sure at the beginning of next year, we'll have something new and exciting for you folks to listen to as well. So thanks again to everyone, and really appreciate your attention.